Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this debate among the three candidates running for the state Senate seat in Middlesex and Worcester counties. My name is Peter Acton, and I will be acting as the moderator this evening. The three candidates are the incumbent Democrat Jamie Eldridge of Acton, Republican Ted Busiek of Littleton, and Terra Friedrichs of Acton. For those of you who are interested, the Senate district consists of the city of Marlborough and the towns of Acton, Ayr, Boxborough, Hudson, Littleton, Maynard, Shirley, Stowe, and precincts 2 and 3 in Sudbury, all in Middlesex County, and the towns of Harvard, Southborough, Westborough, and precinct 3 in Northborough in the county of Worcester. That will be a quiz later this evening. First, I'd like to thank Acton TV for hosting this debate. I understand it will be shown on Acton TV as well as other local cable stations within the Senate district. And I would also like to thank Ching Sung Chang, Acton Selectman, for helping to organize this debate. The format for this evening is as follows. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to present an opening statement. Next, we will spend approximately 35 minutes on questions directed to the individual candidates. The candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each one, and then each of the other 2 candidates will have 1 minute for a response. We have prepared questions in advance, but I have now probably another 20 questions that have been prepared by the audience, and I will try to work as many of those in as I can. Following this segment, we'll take a brief break and then move to the second half of the debate. Here I will pose questions to the candidates which are regarding specific issues. Each candidate will have 1 minute to give a very specific response, and then I will open it up to a more general debate format with each candidate having the opportunity to fully explain their position and their differences with other candidates. I will ask that the candidates seek my recognition to speak, similar to a town meeting format, to prevent the candidates from speaking over one another or all at once. Then we'll move to closing statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute to deliver a closing remark. I will enforce time limits strictly, as this is live television and we are operating under a specific time deadline for the program. There are clocks here to measure the time elapsed for each speaker. The candidates can see those. Please conclude your remarks when the clock indicates that your time has passed. And finally, for the audience, I request that you turn off or put on mute all cell phones. I also request that there be no applause, cheering, booing, or other remarks from the audience, and that we are all respectful of one another. With all those instructions and guidelines, why don't we get started with the opening statements, which we will do in alphabetical order, and I will recognize Mr. Busiek first.
That's terrific. I didn't even know I was going first. I want to start by thanking Acton TV for hosting this. I want to echo your gratitude to Ching Sung Chang because I know he was instrumental in organizing it. I am really excited to be here. I'm thrilled. When I decided to run for office back in the winter, what I knew was that personally I was really dissatisfied with Beacon Hill, with what I see as their mismanagement of the Commonwealth, with the very corrupt status quo on Beacon Hill, with the fact that whenever I went to vote, I felt like I wasn't represented, like I really didn't have a voice at the ballot box. That was what I knew. What I didn't know was how many people there are who feel the same way, and the support that I've received has been amazing. I've never run for office before. I'm not really a politician. I don't talk like a politician. Indeed, that's been one of the criticisms leveled at me, is that I don't have a politician's measured tone. And another thing that I sort of have discovered is that the people who are supporting me, the people who I'm advocating for, don't care about that. And really, I don't care about that either. What we care about is the fact that as our manufacturing base in this Commonwealth is evaporating, literally thousands of people are losing their jobs. And the people that do have jobs are seeing their wages depressed because they have to compete with foreign laborers who are willing to work for a lot less than what a Bay Stater would think of as a market rate. And while wages stagnate, taxes just keep going up against the will of the people, the stated express will of the people. What do the taxes go to pay for? It's very frustrating when you're somebody who works really hard and you see the able-bodied adult man in front of you at the line using an EBT card that they got from the DTA. These are the things we're worried about. I mean, I see I have a little time left, so I'll keep going. For somebody who saves their money, for example, you're basically getting soaked by inflation. We've lost a lot of our autonomy in our local communities, where we see demographic changes forced on communities that maybe don't want them because of affordable housing quotas imposed by Beacon Hill, with no deference to the preferences of the cities and towns. We even see a loss of autonomy in how we educate kids. They can't educate their kids the way they want to because Beacon Hill decides they're going to impose Common Core standards, which are a lowest common denominator standard that aren't good enough for Massachusetts. So again, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm really happy to be able to represent people who think like me. And I see my time's about up, but I'm really looking forward to mixing it up with the other two candidates.
Thank you. Senator Eldridge, it's your turn.
Well, good evening. I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge, and very proud to represent the Middlesex and Worcester District for the past 8 years now, and previously the 37 Middlesex District for 6 years. Great to be here on stage with Ted Busiek, one of my opponents, and Terra Friedrichs, my other opponent, and talk about the issues that really face the 14 communities in the Middlesex and Worcester District. The issues that I've focused on as a state senator, including increasing funding for education, whether it's K through 12, whether it's our higher education system, as represented in what I think is one of the best school systems in the district, the Acton-Boxford Regional School System, fighting for investments in transportation infrastructure. Just this morning, we celebrated the groundbreaking for the Aspet River Rail Trail, which will connect the Aspet River National Wildlife Refuge to downtown Maynard and to the South Acton train station, which I was very proud to fight for funding to upgrade not only that station, but the entire commuter rail. And also to fight to protect the environment. I think that the legacy of this district is environmental protection as well as investing in supporting alternative energy. And I'm very, very proud of my leadership on Beacon Hill on those issues. But I would also add that it's not just about the local issues. It's also about statewide issues that I really think speak to making government more accessible for people. And that's why I've led the fight on transparency, including passing this session the public records reform, the first reform to that law in over 30 years. Continuing to fight on campaign finance reform, being the lead in the Senate on fighting the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, as well as advocating for campaign finance reform, including stricter disclosure by candidates and political parties, as well as doing my part to combat climate change, clearly the biggest issue facing this country and the world today. Issues like investing more in offshore wind, making homes more energy efficient, and advocating for cleaner, more fuel-efficient cars. And then another issue which has been a real passion of mine is criminal justice reform. I think we've reached a point where there's a recognition that mass incarceration not only is costing the Commonwealth millions of dollars, but it's also something that is having a dramatic impact on communities of color and is really destroying a lot of lives. And that's why I've led the effort on things like reforming mandatory minimums, advocating for restorative justice, as well as chairing the Harm Reduction Drug Law Reform Caucus in the legislature and advocating for fair, common sense policies that will reduce taxpayer expense on our prisons and provide a better life for people throughout the Commonwealth. I'm very proud to work on these issues, to be a statewide leader on these, as well as education, environment, and transportation issues. I look forward to the debate tonight, talking about my positions on the issues and how they contrast with my opponents. Thanks again.
Thank you. Ms. Terra Friedrichs,
I'm
it is
ready.
your turn.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for organizing this. In fact, Ted, if you hadn't come forward and decided to organize it, I don't think we would be here. So thank you very much for taking the first step to bring all this to the public. Our beautiful station here is really the last bastion of defense against the mainstream media taking over our government and preventing us from organizing. So we really need these local TV stations. So thank you very much, everybody who operates the TV station, and thank you for being here. And the cameras can't see, but the place is packed here. So thanks everybody for coming out and passing in your questions. It's just wonderful. Jamie and I probably agree on most things, actually. And I am very proud that he has taken the steps on the mass incarceration, because I agree it's a total waste of money, a waste of human lives. It's just not fair or right. And the privatization of prisons and things like that are just things we need to address. And so I thank Jamie for taking the lead on that. He and I also agree on getting big money out of politics, but we take drastically different approaches, although we could do, I suppose, both. I'm very much against an Article 5 constitutional convention. I believe that it gives basically control of our Constitution to Congress. And once we send that letter to Congress calling for such, if the other states all do it too, or enough states, it starts the process and there's nothing we can do from there. We can wait and see if the states ratify things, but it's out of our control. As opposed to that, I'm proposing pass mass amendment, which is using the state constitution, amending the state constitution to say corporations are not people, money is not speech, doing it in a home rule state. We have a very strong constitution, and if it doesn't work, well, shoot. It's like saying we're not even going to go to the protest because we're afraid it won't work. Well, we have to use our powers and leverage our powers while we still have them. I'm here mainly because I feel like we have a crisis, a multi-pronged crisis, an environmental crisis, an income inequality crisis, and a small business crisis. We're getting trumped by international companies that are coming in here and getting subsidies from the State House and then effectively trumping our small businesses. So we talk about, oh, we have to be attractive to business, but you have a CVS. We don't have to lure a CVS here. We don't have to lure these companies here. They're coming here because we're here. And we could be permitting these companies under terms that we believe are fair. Living wage, for example. We could do more things on the pollution side. We have all that right under our state constitution, including tighter water standards. In fact, I'll start there too. I also disagreed with Senator Eldridge on the water infrastructure bill. We tried very hard to get protections for poor towns in there to prevent take over their water rights, but the water infrastructure bill was drafted by a Veolia big water consultant, and we did not get the provisions as much as we begged for them. In terms of
Ms.
growth.
Friedrichs, so
oh, yes,
your
sorry.
time is
Time's
about up.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to the first set of questions. We're going to start with a question for Senator Jamie Eldridge. He'll have 2 minutes to respond, and then the two candidates can rebut for 1 minute each. Senator Eldridge, you've been state senator for 8 years, as you indicated in your opening remarks. During that time, what is your proudest achievement as state senator, and what is your greatest disappointment?
Great questions, and I think anyone who's been an elected official, you're going to have both achievements and disappointments. In terms of my greatest achievement, I would still say at the end of the day, the fight for marriage equality. When I was first elected as a state representative, the Supreme Judicial Court decided in November 2003 that marriage equality was the law of Massachusetts due to an interpretation of our Constitution. And what happened afterwards is some of my more conservative colleagues filed an amendment to say that marriage was between a man and a woman. And so I worked for the next 6 years to defeat that constitutional amendment to make sure that marriage equality was there for all people in Massachusetts, including my constituents. And that still, to this day, is my proudest achievement. In terms of my disappointment, I would say that one of the things that is frustrating, and I know Terra has done some great work on it, is the influence of corporate power on decisions. And we're looking at the end of the legislative session right now and seeing that some bills, like the GMO labeling bill, are probably not going to pass on the House side because there are corporate special interests that are opposed to it. And that's why I've been a strong advocate for things like campaign finance reform, public campaign financing, and getting big money out of politics. And it's a fight that I still need to work on up on Beacon Hill.
Thank you. Mr. Busiek?
I mean, I think that's the contrast right there. My opponent says that his biggest achievement, the thing that he's most proud of, is helping the SJC subvert the will of the people of the Commonwealth. For one thing, I mean, it's not even really his accomplishment. We had a referendum in this state in 2000 over whether or not we wanted to issue marriage licenses to people of the same gender, and overwhelmingly we voted no. We went to the polls and voted no. And the SJC decided, with a wave of their limp-wristed hands, to just toss all that and make laws completely without any accountability for what we wanted. I wouldn't feel the need to be running if my opponents greatest regret were the precipitous loss of jobs we've seen with the evaporation of our manufacturing base. That's what really matters. That's what matters to me.
Thank you. Ms. Friedrichs?
Yes, indeed, my turn. I am very proud of what Jamie did with that work, and I don't think that any one person can be credited with evolution of a society. And I feel like in terms of getting money out of politics, yes, we should work harder. On the day that the Constitutional Convention at the State House was held and the pass-mass vote was set aside, we went around and took a survey of what people were busy doing. And what they were busy doing was negotiating terms, basically watering down terms on important protections like the gas leaks and the pipelines and other types of corporate, effectively, subsidies by allowing these companies to trump our very important protections. And so for me, I laud him on that very important accomplishment. I personally helped gather signatures. They got to, I think, 80,000. It took them many years, but then the Supreme Judicial Court took care of it. We're hoping the legislature will take care of the pass-mass to get money out of politics, too. Thank you.
Thank you. I will try to indicate when the questions are from the audience, and actually the first question for Senator Eldridge was in part from the audience. This question is for Mr. Busiek and is also from the audience. You alluded to this now twice already this evening, so I can tell this is an important issue to you at least. And the question is, Massachusetts is losing jobs. What will you specifically do to stop this?
Well, sure. Probably the flagship proposal of my campaign, the thing that sort of I'm known for now out on the campaign trail, is a very simple proposal to make any product that's manufactured here in the Bay State completely sales tax exempt. So if you make it here and you sell it here, you've already been taxed on it a couple of times. You were taxed when the person who manufactured it paid an income tax. You were taxed when the business who manufactured it paid, business taxes. What Beacon Hill needs to be doing is tilting the playing field in our favor. And what I don't understand is why, if I go into a store to buy a pair of sneakers, I could buy a pair of New Balance sneakers that were manufactured right here in New England, maybe right here in Massachusetts. They're a huge local employer. Or I could buy a pair of Nikes made in China. Now, that's my choice as a consumer, but what I don't understand is why Beacon Hill taxes both of those products at the exact same rate. They don't differentiate at all. They're not at all interested in giving us the leg up. The other thing that I think would really be helpful to us is to, again, observe the will of the people on the income tax. One of my big frustrations, and the big frustrations of all the people who are helping me and putting in all the free volunteer time on my campaign, is that Beacon Hill isn't responsive to them. So we said we wanted to roll back the income tax. Beacon Hill just ignored us. But think about what an edge that gives to employers. If you're trying to get somebody, maybe in a tech field or whatever, to come and work here in Massachusetts, why even base here in Massachusetts if right next door, if they were working the exact same job, they'd be paying no income tax? It's basically a pay raise right on top of what you're already paying them to locate in New Hampshire. So those are just a couple of things. I see I'm out of time, but thank you for the question.
Thank you. Ms. Friedrichs, do you have a...
Oh, yes. I have lots of solutions for small business. I'm a small business owner. I come from a small business family. I believe that we should have a progressive income tax where very small companies pay effectively nothing and very large companies pay a lot. I feel as though we should have a minimum income guarantee. I did the numbers, and the people making a lot of money would see a lot more of their contribution going to people. But the people that make a lot less money, 100,000 or less, would see practically no change. And by having a minimum income guarantee, you free people up from doing jobs they don't want to do, and you allow them to participate in an innovation economy, which we need desperately. I also feel like, in some regards, we should have a progressive sales taxation scheme too, but I think it should favor sustainable businesses, not just any business. We shouldn't be giving a break to gun manufacturers, for example. Thank you.
Senator Eldridge.
I think when we're talking about job creation in Massachusetts, it's first important to remember that jobs actually continue to increase here in Massachusetts. Certainly there are challenges with manufacturing jobs, which really are a national and a global issue. But in terms of jobs coming to Massachusetts, they're actually increasing in Massachusetts. And I would say particularly in Metro West. Just in the past few weeks, I've been to ribbon cuttings for companies like Potpourri in Littleton, Bristol Myers Squibb at Devons, General Electric in Marlborough. So there are companies that continue to come here and employ a lot of people throughout the district. I do want to respectfully point out to my opponent, Ted Busiek, about the sales taxes that I do hope you understand that because of the Interstate Commerce Clause, you can't exempt sales tax state to state, so it has to be a clear standard no matter where a product is produced, and therefore you couldn't exempt the sales tax for certain products manufactured in Massachusetts versus other states. I think really the real important issue is to focus on investment in infrastructure, education, and things like the solar industry to create jobs, and I think we've been successful at that on Beacon Hill.
Peter, I don't want to be rude, but do I get to respond? Or?
No, the way the rules work, you'll get,
That's all right,
if
that's
it comes up later in the second half,
You're the
can,
boss.
But this is limitations on responses at this point. So we will now move to a question for Ms. Friedrichs. Terra, when you announced that you were running for state senate, you indicated, and I quote, "My effort is not intended to win as much as it's intended to send a message," unquote. If you believe you cannot win, why are you running, and what is the message that you intend to send?
Well, I think I could win, but I'd rather just have Jamie do the job, frankly. And so a vote for me, I believe, sends a message to Jamie that the things that I say matter to people. And so for me, I think that I think more people should be running. Across the United States, thousands of people are now signing up to be Bernie-crats and are learning how civics actually works in practice rather than what you're told in fourth grade. And all politics is local, folks, and we run because we want to get the issues out. We want to talk about the Green Party, the Green Rainbow Party's platform of people, peace, and planet, and we want to talk about how we can actually live in a world of abundance if we actually decide we're going to. And so I work with scholars and economists and people that are experts in public policy, and the things they're telling me are so exciting that I feel like it's time to talk about these things in the open corridor. There's way too much going on behind closed doors at the State House. We try and find out who's in there, what companies are in there, what lobbyists are in there, and they say, oh, the rules don't allow us to tell you. Well, I can tell you that if you do elect me, you're going to find out who's behind those closed doors, because the rules aren't law. The rules are just rules. And for me, I think it's more important that the public know what's going on at the State House, and then having to wonder. So when things are getting negotiated, like the climate bill that was just passed, I believe, by the Senate, every day we were saying, well, who's saying what to who? They weren't posting any updates online, so we didn't know what we were advocating or promoting. We didn't know who was in these meetings or when they were. It was very difficult for people who care about something to actually know what's going on there. As opposed to in the local government, we have open meeting law, which doesn't apply to this State House. So those guys, they basically can do whatever they want, whenever they want, and talk to whoever they want, and set the agenda. You have a small group of people that set the agenda for the entire state. It doesn't even get addressed if it's not on the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Eldridge, your turn.
Well, first of all, I do want to praise Terra for running and also what appears to be a semi-endorsement. But I really do applaud you for running, and as I said earlier, I really do applaud your work on taking on corporate power and also Citizens United, even though we have different approaches. I think that what you see at Beacon Hill, and again, there's always disappointments and victories, is that I am proud to be part of an effort on the progressive side to pass things like public records reform. Was the lead author on a number of the bills that ended up in the final legislation to not only open up the process for state agencies, but towns and cities across the Commonwealth. I would agree we need to do more. And in terms of getting people to run for office, that's really why I go back to campaign finance reform, is when I first ran for the legislature in 2002, I ran under what was known as the Clean Elections Law, where I was publicly financed, and it allowed people, including myself, that I wasn't well established, I wasn't particularly well off, to run for office. That law was repealed, but I think we need to get back to public campaign financing, make sure every single person, regardless of their background or circumstance, has the opportunity to run for office.
Thank you. I've been told to remind each of the candidates to try to hold the microphone a little bit closer to their mouths so that it comes through. Your turn, Mr. Busiek.
Okay, boys, I will deep throat this thing for you. Yeah, I think it's I really don't like the question. I think that it's a really sort of cynical thing to ask. Terra, if you can't win, what are you doing running? I mean, I wonder if people said to Columbus, look, you're never going to get anywhere, just don't get in the boat. You've got to try. I've had people in my own party say to me, oh, well, you know, your ideas are sort of outside of the box, so just don't advocate them because they can't get done. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. I'm thrilled that Terra's running. I think the more voices, the better. I just signed a petition the other day to get Gary Johnson on the ballot in Massachusetts, because the more choices that you have, the better off you are. So what Terra is doing by running, what I'm doing by running, what Jamie's doing by running for re-election is providing you with more options. I'll say quickly that since you opened the door for me, Jamie's reference to running under the clean elections laws and being publicly financed is just delicious to me. Your entire career has been parasitic.
Okay, we will now move to a question for Senator Eldridge. And this comes partially from the audience and builds upon something that we had talked about earlier. The Commonwealth needs to invest significantly in public transportation. You recently supported a measure that would limit fare increases on the MBTA to no more than 5% over 2 years. We're way behind. How can we catch up given the cost?
When we're talking about public transportation, I think it's important that we're talking about how to fairly fund it, including thinking about those who are less well off. And what my approach has been in the legislature is to focus on progressive taxation, whether it's a progressive income tax, whether it's looking at closing corporate tax loopholes, or in some cases, raising the sales tax, which is progressive compared to other state sales taxes since it exempts food, drugs, and clothes, and dedicate that money to infrastructure, including in transportation. So we passed that legislation last session, raised over $600 million to invest in the transportation system. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very proud of my successful work to get over $220 million investment into the Fitchburg commuter rail, which has dramatically improved access and the frequency of the number of trains into Boston and Cambridge. That being said, there is a push on addressing how much people should pay in fares. The Senate took the lead in limiting that increase because I personally think those that are less well off taking the train into Boston or Cambridge, they can only afford so much. And so I'd rather have the focus be on progressive taxation and have some limits to how much Governor Baker can increase fares. I thought we had accomplished that last session, but Governor Baker did make a push for another increase. I happen to oppose that increase, but it did pass. And I think when we're thinking about public transportation, I think of it as a right, I think of it as a good, and therefore it should be a fair burden on how people pay for it. And if you just raise fares, that at some point there's going to be a sticking point where people are no longer going to take public transportation. And that's why we need that approach of a progressive taxation to invest in infrastructure, including in transportation.
Thank you. Ms. Friedrichs, you may respond.
Yes, I think that also that transit in the cities is a right. We build the cities so that we can effectively stack people very high buildings, and that if we're going to do that, that we have to provide the infrastructure for people to live. I think that it should be no charge in the urban areas, and I also feel like people should be able to, like an EBT card, be able to get free transit if they're under a certain income. I applaud the work that Jamie has done. I think that we need to go further in terms of the progressive taxation. I think that the towns and cities have the opportunity to do many things on that level in terms of the cost of permitting business, water resources, and things like that, that we could be doing more on a local level. And the city of Boston, I believe, is going to. I'm participating in a People's Housing Board in Boston that's going to be coming forward with some proposals relative to what the city of Boston could do. And so I hope that we support that at the State House. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Busiek, your turn.
Yeah, so this really spells it out, folks, as to why I'm running for office. We're like 3 questions deep into the debate, and Jamie's first answer for how we can fix something is to raise taxes. Anybody who's watched his career will not be surprised by this. What I know about the MBTA is that we're hiring MBTA workers at a salary of like $90K a year, and they're taking home over $200K because they get so much overtime. Clearly that's a scam, okay? If somebody's more than doubling their income through overtime, they're scamming the system. I have a friend who lives in Brookline, commuted to work at the place I worked at in Braintree. He told me almost nobody in Brookline pays the fares because they're not enforced in his neck of the woods. When I tell people that out in the district, it comes as a big surprise to them. So the idea that there's a positive right to transportation, that somebody else has the right for me to pay for them to get around, is absurd to me. If we want to have a system like this, we need to make it work.
Senator Eldridge.
He gets
Oh, I'm sorry, no,
gets to
I'm
respond,
sorry.
but I
Nope,
don't.
nope,
Respond
nope,
too.
nope.
Can I
nope.
respond
I'm
too?
sorry, I lost track of the order. That's my mistake. Nope, we're going to play completely by the rules.
We're going to keep you honest here, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to turn to a question to you, Mr. Busiek. And although this is from the audience, and although it was not addressed specifically to you, I think it makes sense to pose it to you, and then let the others talk about. And the question is as follows: Massachusetts has been a leader on gun control. Yesterday, Attorney General Maura Healey issued an enforcement notice to all gun sellers and manufacturers in the state regarding the ban on the sale of assault weapons and also copycat weapons. How do you feel about what the Attorney General did about the gun ban, and what's your position?
So this is really recent news. It's from yesterday, so I just want to walk over it to make sure we're all on the same page, and because I think it's important that people understand what's going on here. Massachusetts has had an assault weapons ban in place for a number of years, and through the entirety of that, it's been the Attorney General's job to interpret what's meant by an assault weapon. Now, because this ban has been in place for so long, we have a long-standing precedent as to what that means. What Maura Healey decided to do yesterday was radically redefine what's meant by an assault weapons ban, so that, A, a lot of gun dealers in the state find that a large portion of their inventories are now illegal for them to sell, and B, a lot of people who already have these guns own an illegal gun. And what she said, she put out a statement saying, well, look, we're going to really, really drastically change the way that we define assault weapons, so that a wide range, basically any kind of standard modern hunting rifle is now an assault weapon. But if you buy one from today going forward, it's illegal because that's the law. But if you bought one before we decided to change our minds, you're good. We're going to grandfather you in, not because that's what's legal or legitimate, but because we're just capriciously deciding that that's what we're going to do. You can take this out of gun control as a bigger issue. This is the capricious, winsome enforcement of laws, the sort of rule by fiat that people are so sick of with state government. And absolutely, I don't support it. I think it's a terrible travesty, and it's sort of an I told you so for those of us who didn't vote for Maura Healey.
Ms. Friedrichs, response.
Well, I am in favor of what Maura Healey did, and I'm sad about the grandfathering. I did not know about that. But moving forward, it's easier to get a gun in this state, even with all of the background checks, than it is to get a car license. And to me, I think it should be harder to get a gun than to get a car license. For me, though, I think a big reason why people are buying so many guns is they're afraid of the police state that's being created by arming local and state police to the hilt. If you looked at what's going on in Cleveland with the RNC police that are there, it looks like a small army. And people are afraid of that. I come from Wisconsin. I visited there not too long ago, and people have 40, 50 guns, and their biggest fear is not of burglars. Their biggest fear is the police. And so I feel like we could take a stand and stop arming the local police and the state police, and allowing. What happened in Wichita? Am I almost done?
Yes, your
I'm done.
time is
okay,
up.
Sorry.
Senator Eldridge.
Well, I strongly support our Attorney General Maura Healey's decision to ban copycat assault weapons, and I strongly disagree, Ted, with your position in opposition to her action. I was very proud in 2004 when the federal assault weapons ban expired in Congress to pass the assault weapons ban in the Massachusetts legislature. And I think, look at just what's happened over the past 3 months, whether it's the killing of 49 people at the Orlando, Florida nightclub, San Bernardino, California, the 5 Dallas police officers, is that each of these massacres was committed by an assault weapons, military-style weapon that it has a better place in war than anywhere on the streets of the United States. And the idea that there are gun dealers that just by making a couple tweaks to an assault weapon would be allowed to sell that on the upwards of $10,000 a year is deeply disappointing. So I applaud her leadership on that, and I think we need to do more to protect people across the Commonwealth with gun safety and gun control.
I would so love to respond to this. I
Well,
can't.
Afraid not. That's the format we agreed to. Question for you, Ms. Friedrichs. You've been a strong advocate for the preservation of open space. As state senator, what action would you take to encourage or create incentives for local municipalities to preserve and protect additional open space?
My favorite question. Thank you so much. I believe there should be a transfer tax statewide on every transfer of real estate with an exemption of one lifetime exemption and exemption for people of lower means. And I believe that that should go into a land bank that is for the sole purpose of both buying and preserving land, as well as creating extremely affordable income housing. And the Chapter 40B has not worked. We see all kinds of housing that we don't need, and all of the people who are desperately housing insecure. The lists are growing. People are living on the street. I mean, I can count the number of friends of mine that are homeless now as opposed to 10 years ago, and it's just shocking. And to watch these policies effectively not work, to me, is one of the reasons I'm running for office, in the hopes of getting some awareness created about what's really going on out there. We can sit around meetings and talk, but until we get our hands dirty and actually go live the life of somebody that's homeless and see what it's like every day, it's a full-time job. It's a full-time job and a half to actually figure out where you're going to sleep that night without getting physically assaulted by sleeping under bushes, because the beds are just not there. Pine Street Inn, they're overflowing, and pumping more and more money into the system isn't working because the property values are so high, and they're going to effectively Chapter 40B developers that can afford to gentrify and further evict more people onto the street. It's just a shocking situation where you go to a shelter and not only are the beds filled, they're sleeping on the floor, and there are people waiting outside who've been turned away. And so for me, I think a transfer tax would do what we can to provide enough open space so that we can actually farm enough to feed ourselves. Should we not be able to get food from California or wherever drought-stricken place that Nestle is attacking lately, we have to be able to have enough open space both for our food and for our green aesthetics, because I think it's important to be able to look and see green. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Busiek, your response?
Yeah, Terra, I love you, but if you're worried about people going homeless, you don't want to be raising taxes. The more that we prod and poke and constrict our economy to achieve some kind of a social goal, the more difficult it will be for normal, hardworking people to make a living. Our economy is not a social petri dish, and if you're worried about housing prices, maybe stop artificially manipulating the housing market. And I know that you aren't doing anything because you aren't in office. But when we, for example, institute a sweeping vote buying scheme, a convoluted vote buying scheme called Chapter 40B, what we're doing is we're manipulating the housing market. We're putting an artificial motivator into what should be a natural environment, a free market environment. That's never good. It's always bad. It's always retarding to do that. So, I'm glad that you're concerned about this. I'm just worried that your solutions would not take us in the right direction.
Senator Eldridge, your response.
Well, I do want to praise Terra's work on open spaces, both in your term as a selectman and as a resident. And since we're all Acton residents, or we all grew up in Acton, I was very proud to support efforts like protecting Terra Park, protecting Acton Arboretum, as well as advocating more recently for protecting the Simeone land in South Acton. As a legislator, I've been a leader on environmental issues. Last session, we passed an environmental bond bill that sets aside tens of millions of dollars to help cities and towns protect open space. I've been a strong supporter of the Community Preservation Act, which Acton was an early adopter of, which has gone to protecting land like the Simeone land in Terra Park. What we need to do in terms of next steps is I do think there needs to be a more vigorous effort by our state agencies. I happen to be a critic of Governor Baker in terms of his environmental policies on water, open space, and energy, and I'm someone that has been pushing back on his policies on those fronts as a state senator.
Thank you. We're going to go back to Senator Eldridge. We're going to do one more round of questions for each of the candidates, and then I think we will be ready to take a break. And this is from the audience for Senator Eldridge. What is your voting record on 1, allowing illegal or undocumented people to acquire driver's licenses, 2, on increasing taxes on small business, and 3, on increasing the gas tax?
Well, I've been a strong supporter of immigrant rights, and I don't believe that the bill to allow undocumented immigrants to earn a driver's license has come up for a vote, but I am a proud co-sponsor of the bill and have fought to pass the bill into law. I think it's a matter of public safety. I think it's a matter of fairness. Those that came to this country to earn a living and provide a better life for their kids, give them an opportunity to have a driver's license, which makes everyone in the community safer. On the tax front, I've been very clear that I support progressive taxation, which in my mind means taxing those who are wealthier, whether individuals or large corporations, and reducing the burden on working families as well as small businesses. One of the measures that we have before us in the legislature right now is the millionaire's tax, which would raise the income tax for anyone earning over $1 million a year to 9%. It would raise about $2 billion a year specifically dedicated to transportation education, and that would, in my opinion, reduce the burden on property taxes, including on small businesses. In terms of my commitment on job creation, I really do think it comes down to investing in infrastructure, investing in education, and making sure that those that might not have initially great education, that we invest in things like early and pre-K so they can, if they're having challenges in school, they can get a better education and move on in life and provide a better living for their families. So I'm proud of my record on Beacon Hill, but I have been clear that I do support progressive taxation and not regressive taxation.
Thank you. Mr. Busiek, your response.
I guess I get a minute, so I'll just pick one issue, which is driver's licenses for illegal immigrants. I met earlier in the month with Michael and Maureen Maloney. Their son was slain by an illegal immigrant who never should have even been in the Commonwealth, let alone behind the wheel of a car. His name was Matthew Denise, and he was only 23 years old. The Central American, I believe he was a Guatemalan, who ran him over, lodged poor Matthew in his wheel well and just kept driving. Even though pedestrians ran up and pounded on the car and said, "Stop, stop," he drove for another quarter mile and then veered off the road, killing Matt. The coroner said that if he just would have stopped, Matt would have been fine. The idea that we would attract these people to come to the Commonwealth by telling them, by advertising to them that they'll be able to operate unhindered on our roads is so sad to me. It's so sad to me that you would be so callous with the lives of your own constituents.
Thank you. Ms. Friedrichs.
Where do I even begin? First of all, I don't think that a person can be illegal. I mean, if they exist, then they have the right to be here. And I am for licenses for anybody who's driving safely. And I'm almost aghast and can hardly speak that I feel like we need to step back from creating an atmosphere of fear of a certain class of people, a certain race of people, of sexual orientation, and start thinking about how to address our underlying issues relative to living a world of abundance. Seriously, we have enough for everybody. As John Root, co-founder of Berkshire's in Western Mass, who was kind enough to drive all the way here, and hopefully he got a question in, he says that money is a creation of debt to pay the bankers. And we could instead decide, using a public bank in Massachusetts, that we own the money. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now turn to a question for Mr. Busiek. Mr. Busiek, recently you posted a comment on Twitter which used a word that many people consider to be offensive and inappropriate. Why do you feel this sort of language is appropriate or acceptable for political candidates?
What was the word that I used?
I believe it was faggot.
Wow, that is really, yeah, you're right. I myself am scandalized that I would say such a thing. I don't really feel anything about language. I use the language that I use because it's who I am. I did hear from somebody. Actually, you know what? It's interesting. I've got a minute, 30 seconds. I'll create a great contrast for you between my two opponents. One of them immediately demagogued the issue, tried to turn it into like a gay thing. You know, it was a little bit pathetic, but it was predictable. The other one, and nobody knows this, I think, except for you and I, but I want to give you plaudits for this, reached out to me privately through an email and said, you know, there are people in my generation, people who I know, who find this word offensive, and you really shouldn't say things like that. You're running for office now. I know that whatever kids these days are saying all kinds of crazy stuff. The first reaction, the reaction from the guy who's ostensibly a politician, didn't do anything for me. In fact, hundreds of people rallied to me when I refused to apologize. I got donations and letters of support, people saying thank you for not letting people bully you on the language that you use. But the second reaction, made me kind of think, and I did actually end up entirely on the strength of Terra Friedrichs, my opponent, say that I wouldn't use this word anymore because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I do think that we've become way too hypersensitive and thin-skinned as a society. I think that as a trend, this is sterilizing. I don't believe that it makes debate. I don't believe that it enriches our public discourse to be on eggshells about what we can and can't say. My time's up.
Thank you. Ms. Friedrichs, your response.
Well, I just feel like we have an opportunity to grow as a society and to grow, to learn about each other and learn about why are you afraid of this and that. And if we don't actually contact each other and say, hi, how are you? What are you thinking? Why are you doing that? That we miss that opportunity. And so for me, I just thought it was an opportunity to get to know Ted because he actually worked on my campaign probably before you discovered some of my my leanings. But
I knew all about you, Terra.
Good. Anyways.
I like you because you're honest.
Thank you. But I didn't really know him that much. And so it gave me an opportunity to see more about who he is. And so we still disagree on a lot, but I do feel like I can contact him and at least say how I feel. And he will give that at least some credence. And so you had said to me, one heartfelt response made more than 99 attacks. Is that what you said? Something like that?
I think so, yeah.
Senator Eldridge, your response.
Well, Ted, I continue to be just deeply offended that you would use a homophobic slur in social media and out in the public. And as far as I can tell, you haven't yet apologized for it. I think one of the important things to remember
Don't hold your breath.
I think one of the important things to remember is that when you represent a district, you represent all the people, including those who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. And the fact that not only did you use that homophobic slur and not apologize, but it's backed up by anti-gay policies. You're opposed to same-sex marriage. Just the ability for two people who love each other to be able to be married and have economic security. You're opposed to transgender rights for them to enter a store or restaurant. You're even opposed to same-sex couples being able to adopt children, something that has been the law of the land in this Commonwealth, a Commonwealth based on civil liberties for over 2 decades. So when you talk about speaking out on hate speech, part of my role as an elected official is to speak out against hate speech. That was hate speech you used. I'm embarrassed for you at 30 years old that you cannot apologize and apparently use that language to your friends. You're not 18 years old, you're not 70, you're an educated 30-year-old person, and you use that in conversation in social media. I think that's deeply embarrassing.
Jamie went over his time. Do I get to respond?
Nope. He was short on his time on a couple of earlier answers.
Fair enough.
We're trying to keep track here, and we will now turn to Ms. Friedrichs. And the last question for the specific candidates, and this is from the audience, and directing it to you because you raised the issue in the answer to your last question about open space. So the question is, Chapter 40B of Massachusetts General Laws provides developers with incentives to build affordable housing. Could you explain your view of the 40B law and the resulting effect on communities, and how would you fix it?
Thank you, Peter. Chapter 40B.
That was
for
not my
those-
question. That came from the audience.
For those who don't know, allows the developer to bypass local zoning and many other rules, historic preservation, even wetlands rules, to build housing that is quote-unquote affordable. So 75% of the development will be market rate, 600,000, whoever, $1 million, doesn't matter. And 25% has to be affordable to people over $42,000, or is it $44,000 a year now? So I would agree that in certain communities, this is fabulous, except for that it's not doing anything for those that are below $40,000 a year. And if you look at the actual record, the tens of thousands of units that have been created under the 40B program, very few, if any, are actually for people who are actually housing insecure, that make below $30,000, below $20,000 a year. And so I still have some time, yes. And so I will talk now about how we are working in Boston to actually create a new system that is tighter than 40B, which allows for 30% below 50% AMI. So it would be like 40,000 to 30,000 or 25,000, and 20% below that. So for people that make less than $20,000 a year. So you take care of the homeless problem and everything. And I've looked at the numbers, folks. These developments make billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. One developer on one project can lose $300,000 a day in profits if the community slows the permitting down by days. So with that kind of money on the table, why aren't we negotiating better housing for the folks that need it the most? And Marty Walsh is now being appraised of this issue, and people are coming forward, interfaith leaders, et cetera, and so we're going to be doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Eldridge, your response.
The Chapter 40B law is absolutely a flawed law. I always say there's no perfect law. I am a supporter of it, and I have seen how the construction of affordable housing units through 40B projects has brought those families that are less well off throughout the district I represent. I think a lot of times people who run for office talk about 40B projects in sort of out in a cloud. Well, I've met with families who live in 40B projects. They tend to be working class families. They tend to be teachers, firefighters, police officers. They're not poor. They're working class. But the ability for 25% of a housing project to be affordable gives an opportunity to come into communities like Acton and Boxborough and provide better education, better quality of life for their kids. If you're talking about providing more affordable housing for those who are truly poor, that has nothing to do with Chapter 40B. That has to do with our housing authorities providing more funding, and that's one of the things I've also championed. It's a dual approach, 40B and low-income housing. We need to do better, but I think we're making progress at the state level.
Mr. Busiek, your response.
Yeah, if you want an example of an abstruse and convoluted vote-buying scheme, look at the affordable housing laws in Massachusetts. Essentially, the way it works is whenever you make money, Beacon Hill takes a little bit of your money, and then they put it in a pile, and then they give it to a developer or a landlord in exchange for a deed restriction, which then benefits you because you live in that house, which means you vote for them, which means they keep taking your money. It's just a weird, convoluted project. I think we should just scrap the whole thing. I don't really see what its utility is. But even if we want to keep it, if we want to say, well, look, if you're a developer and you want to get around the zoning restrictions of your shishi little town by offering some, some deed-restricted units or something like that, what really, really bothers me is this quota. The idea that Beacon Hill would impose a 10% quota on all the municipalities and say, look, you need to have this much affordable housing in your community, whether it's what you want or not, that's very alarming to me. And I don't think it's what we want.
Thank you. Thank you all. We will now take a 2-minute break, give everybody a chance to catch their breath and clear their heads, and then we will return. Thank you.
love.
Can we get strawberries?
No, honey.
Please.
Okay.
Okay, that was a very quick 2 minutes. We'll now move to the more open, interactive phase of the debate involving around specific issues of interest to the district and the state. I will pose the questions to the candidates. Each candidate will have 1 minute to give a brief response, and then we will allow people to respond to one another as long as you work me into the process a little bit here. So we will go to the first issue question, which is as follows. The over 60 population is the most rapidly growing segment of our population in this district. At the same time, many seniors face critical needs in terms of both financial and healthcare issues such as affordable housing and food, prescription drugs, and long-term health care. What measures, if any, would you take to assist our growing senior population to meet these needs? Senator Eldridge, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. That's an excellent question. So how do we better serve seniors? And seniors absolutely are the largest growing population in Massachusetts, including in the Middlesex and Worcester district. I think there's a few approaches. I think, first of all, on the transportation front, and I really give a lot of praise to municipal officials and staff in Acton, is improving the shuttle and bus service in Acton. I worked very hard to find state funding through the Community Innovation Challenge and more recently the Community Compact to allow for a shuttle service that not only goes through Acton, but also now goes to Littleton, Maynard, and possibly Westford. So that's an effort to help those seniors who perhaps aren't able to drive anymore to have shuttle service. I think on the housing front, I think there is a need for more affordable housing for seniors who are maybe empty nesters and they want to stay in Acton, but they can't afford to live in a large house. And that does get back to the idea of smart growth housing. So I'm a very strong supporter of that. And then the last thing, which I've always championed, is increasing funding for councils on aging and senior centers. There's a lot of discussion here in Acton about the need for a new senior center, which I happen to support. The state needs to do more to support senior centers across the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Senator Eldridge. Mr. Busiek.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, seniors love me, and I love them too. And the reason is because I understand that when you talk about state assistance, right, when you think about the state helping people out, to me, I always say I have three people in mind: widowed mothers, the disabled, and the elderly, right? And let's talk about the elderly. They built the Commonwealth that we live in. So if we're going to be having state projects or programs to help people, it shouldn't be, and it's a real shame to me, that we would allocate resources, for example, to illegal immigrants who shouldn't even be here, when there are seniors who are being forced out of their homes because they can't make their property taxes because the nice little sort of parochial town that they moved into has gentrified, as you said, Terra, and they're not going to be able to pay their tax bill as their property values skyrocket. So I guess, are we still on a timer? I thought this was
we're
open.
on 1 minute.
Open
We're on 1
discussion
minute.
now.
Quick response, and then we'll open it up to debate.
You got it.
Okay, Ms. Friedrichs, you've got 1 minute.
Okay, yes. I think that in the crises that we're in the various fronts, that smart growth is a mistake. That smart growth, in theory, the idea of building high-density housing near trains is a great idea. What's happened in practice is that the industry uses the lingo smart growth to forward the ideas of accelerated 40B and accelerated growth, and we're never going to solve our problems if we keep on this growth addiction. My opponent very quietly passed a accelerated 40B bill in the Senate that takes more power away from the towns and puts it in the hands of an agency that effectively is not accountable to the people. So we need to stop thinking that smart growth is the solution. Think of it as a nice idea that we consider strongly, but that we need to first address our issues with affordable housing at the real level of need, and then work from there. Thank you.
I think-
Someone wish to make a comment?
Yeah, Mr. Moderator, if I could add, and Terra, we do have a difference about the law, and just to make reference to it, it's the zoning reform law. And I think what's important to remember about smart growth or zoning reform is it's the idea of building, denser housing for people that are in downtown, creating housing opportunities while protecting open space in other parts of the town, oftentimes carrying out the master plan or the wishes of a town. And therefore, you, by economies of scale, can provide more affordable housing, including for seniors, while also protecting open space for people to enjoy. It's something that I've seen, say, in the town of Hudson. Town of Hudson built a 60-plus housing, but they also have worked to make infrastructure improvements, invest in the rail trail, and it's attracted more restaurants, more businesses, so that if anyone who goes down to downtown Hudson now, it's really thriving. Part of that, I think, is the smart growth policies, and I think we really do disagree. I think sometimes, respectfully, you seem to be opposed to any development at all, whereas I think if you have smart growth development approach, you can protect open space while also building housing and economic development that's sustainable for everyone.
Ms. Friedrichs, you want to
Okay,
respond?
I would respectfully disagree. That Acton voluntarily created thousands of units in the 70s and 80s of market rate housing that is still very affordable. No deed restricted needed. It's small, it's nice. I lived in Meadowbrook for a number of years, 5 years. I started my business there. And I feel like for seniors, relative to taxation, Ted, we collectively, Peter and I, as part of the senior tax relief program here in Acton, increased the budget of for senior tax relief. So if you're out there and you're having trouble paying your taxes, come in and see us. See Brian McMullen at Town Hall, and chances are he's going to get you a discount on your taxes. If you're of, I think it's below 60,000, or is it? No, that's right.
There's
It's
several different programs.
It's several different programs, but if you're having trouble, come see him, and you show him that you're income constrained, and you might be surprised, very pleasantly surprised. Oh, I have more time. Excellent. So
Well, no, you don't. No,
I
you
don't. The
No,
clock
we're gonna
says
give Mr. We're going to give Mr. No,
Oh,
that's the
okay.
total time
Oh,
for
okay.
everyone to debate. So, Mr. Busiek, we're going to let you have a chance.
Well, I don't want to be a time hog, but I would just say, that's a terrific example of a good municipal program. But what I'm focused on is what we can do on the state level, and it's almost I don't want to be too melodramatic, but it's almost kind of dystopian to me to talk about taking the people who built the state that we live in and herding them into these tiny little units because that's a good way to take care of our seniors. These people have homes. My supporters in Acton, for example, where the median income is now 150K. They've been living there for 30 or 40 years. They have homes. They herding them into some tiny little senior living apartment isn't a good solution for them. They want to stay where they are.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the second question, and this is, quite frankly, a potpourri of several questions that we've received from the audience as well as one that we had ourselves. So bear with me, it's sort of multi-pronged. Put it in the context of Acton and Boxborough, since 2010, the number of special education students has increased by 15%, while state funding has not kept pace. Do you believe the state is doing all that it can do to support local school districts in funding SPED? And in addition, how do you feel about current education policies with regard to the Boston Public Schools specifically? And then finally, what is your position on charter schools? That's why I said I'm trying to work all of this in. This is the broad education question. So we'll start with Mr. Busiek.
I'm going to work from the back forward, and you're going to help me out if I forget. All right. So charter schools, yeah. I mean, my thoughts on schooling are, an ideal scenario would be near total autonomy outside of some standardized tests, which I think we're doing too much of now. But an ideal scenario would be near total autonomy for local school districts without interference from Beacon Hill. We have way too much of that already. But as long as we're going to stick within this model where, Beacon Hill is pulling the strings and oftentimes not kicking in the funding for the mandates that they have, and local communities don't have strict control over their schools, I like charter schools. They just provide more choice. So I'm in favor of raising the cap on charter schools. You talked about the Boston public school system specifically?
Yes, the question was specifically, what is your opinion about current education policies in the Boston public schools?
My opinion is that it's, I don't know. I don't really have an opinion, to be honest, about the Boston. I don't live in Boston, and neither do any of my constituents. What was the last one?
Charter school, special education funding, and Boston public schools.
Okay, special education funding. Yeah, that's a good example. If Beacon Hill is going to have mandates, right, then they've got to pay for them, and SPED's a great example of that. I think I'm out of time.
Yes,
right?
you are. Ms. Friedrichs?
Oh, I'm
Your
very,
minute.
very
You're
much
up
in
next.
favor of more spending. I spent years working with a young man who is a very severe autistic spectrum person, and I know how difficult it could be, and I could only imagine what it would be like to even have 5 kids like this all day long. But as much as he's troubled and challenged, he's become a great artist, and he's a fantastic person that works with people in his own way, in his own community. So I'm very much in favor of increasing SPED funding. And the other one was about Boston schools.
And also charter schools.
My friends in Boston think that the Boston schools actually have enough money. They're just not cut loose to be able to do what they want to do, that the teachers and the parents should be in charge. I'm very much and Ted and I can probably agree on this, I'm very much a fan of unschooling. Has anybody heard of this? Yes, and so the idea is that kids are naturally curious, and that if we provide a space for them with the equipment and toys and items that they need and guidance, that they'll learn faster than they would under the rigorous testing type environment that we have now. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Eldridge.
On the charter school front, voters will have a very important decision to make in the fall because there is a referendum to dramatically lift the cap on charter schools throughout Massachusetts, and I am a strong opponent of that. And I do want to highlight to my Republican opponent Ted is Ted, in one breath you said that you support autonomy for local communities for education policies, but then you do also support charter schools. And I think the problem with charter schools is that local school committees don't have any oversight over charter schools. And I've really seen how in communities like Marlborough on Hudson, where there has been a dramatic decrease of students in the public schools going to the charter schools, which has actually weakened the public school system. So I think that there needs to be more oversight of charter schools throughout the Commonwealth, and that's partly why I opposed the referendum. As far as special education goes, the Massachusetts legislature has been increasing the special ed circuit breaker for many years. So that's the reimbursement that school districts get if they are sending children out of district because of very large special education costs. We absolutely need to do better. I've been a co-sponsor of a number of bills to increase that state support. And I would say at the end of the day, one of the most critical things to do is increase revenue on those who are most wealthy and dedicate that to our public schools, including providing a great education for special needs kids.
I agree with Jimmy on that. Thank you.
So
Mr.
let me,
Busiek?
if you
Yep.
don't mind,
Sure.
Mr.
No,
Moderator.
absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a lot to untangle here. The whole point of charter schools is that they're not run by the local school boards, that they're outside of, if what I said was that my ideal would be for local school boards to have complete autonomy. But as long as they don't, as long as we're seeing these sort of cookie cutter standards imposed, yeah, I want parents to be able to have choices. You're kind of making my case for me when you say, well, the problem is these charter schools, they suck all the kids out and then there's no kids going to the public. Well, that's the point. Why are all the kids going to the charter schools? If you look at U.S. News and World Report's rankings of high schools in Massachusetts, 2 of the top 3 are charter schools. So clearly they're meeting a need, right, that isn't being met. Nobody would be flooding to the charter schools if they were an inferior product. They're not an inferior product. Otherwise, they'd be empty.
Ms. Friedrichs?
Well, I was going to say that
Requested time.
I don't think that people should be making profit on public services. This is the privatization of our effectively public infrastructure, and I don't have a problem with a few of these things. Okay, so we'll try it and see how it goes. But we can't, as Jamie put it, gut our public education system in favor of what in business they call it's like a vulture capitalist tactic, where you go in and you do really well for a period of time until the market is empty, and then you do whatever you want. And so unless we have a choice for public education, we're going to end up in the same situation for all of our public services, whether it be prisons or water infrastructure or fire. We've got to be very careful about always having a public choice, like the Acton cable TV studio. We need to have these public options. Thank you.
So can I jump back in, or Jamie, go ahead. after
Jamie,
you.
if you,
So I think, one of the
We'll split the-
challenges
we'll
with
split the remaining
with
time
answering
between the
questions
two of
is the limited amount of time, but I think what I would add, Ted, about the charter school issue, is that more often than not, charter schools are creaming from the top. They're making sure that only those who are most educated, often most wealthy, to get into charter schools, and they're discouraging anyone else, and that's partly why some charter schools have higher test scores. That's certainly my conversations with the Marlborough School Committee is those kind of experiences. So when you talk about charter schools, it is a level of who's getting in and who's not getting in, and that influences how they do in test scores. I think that's very important to remember when we're talking about even dramatically increasing more charter schools throughout Massachusetts.
What a disgustingly elitist perspective, that the idea that there are two classes of students, the poor students who are destined to mediocrity, and then the cream of the crop who gets siphoned off by the charter schools. No, all the students deserve the best that they can possibly get. If the charter schools are pulling the cream of the crop, maybe it's because they're teaching those kids how to be the cream of the crop.
okay, we're going to leave it at that, I'm afraid. Because we're trying to cover as many issues here as we can. The next one has to do with your position on the marijuana legalization initiative that will be on the November 2016 ballot. Are you for it or against it, and why? And then can you also speak briefly about your views generally on the ballot initiative process, and whether you support that process and any attempts to abolish it? And we'll start with you, Ms. Friedrichs.
Abolish the right to petition and alter our government that's provided for in our state constitution? I can't imagine. What are they going to do? A ballot initiative? Oh no, the State House will do it for us. But I think the State House instead should get money out of politics before they start trying to reduce our right to petition. That's the first thing. The second thing on marijuana, hey, I'm not against it. I feel like I have learned more about marijuana in the last 3 years, about the health aspects, about the reduction in other drugs when people are using marijuana responsibly, the reduction in opioids, the reduction in depressant medications, goes on and on and on, the health aspects of marijuana. So I'm all in favor of legalizing marijuana. I feel like we should legalize it and tax it. And the folks that are against it largely have a vested interest in incarcerating people for it. Thank you.
Senator Eldridge.
Well, just to get out of the way, I completely oppose any effort to abolish the referendum process. Massachusetts is one of the first states to embrace this, and I think it is often a good way for the people to leapfrog over corporate special interests and get legislation passed. In terms of the ballot measure to legalize marijuana, it's definitely been a tough decision, but I do support legalizing marijuana. I think at the end of the day, there needs to be a recognition that there's a significant number of residents in Massachusetts who do use marijuana, and therefore the idea that somehow that should be made illegal or they should be punished for that, I think is wrong. And we've seen with ballot initiatives from decriminalizing marijuana and now allowing medical marijuana that the public generally supports that note of thinking. I agree with Terra with the idea that you regulate, you tax marijuana, and that's the best way to address some instances of addiction or overuse, and don't just allow it to go into the black market where you have increases of crime. So therefore, my approach really is to regulate marijuana like alcohol, which I think for the most part has worked well in this country.
Mr. Busiek.
I will be voting against legalizing marijuana, but if the initiative were successful, if the will of the people were that they wanted to liberalize our laws on marijuana, I would respect that. Personally, I don't think it's conductive to the kind of culture that to forming the kind of culture that I want to live in, to encourage people to smoke pot and get stoned. But I do think that it's kind of risible that Jamie would laud the ballot initiative process, of course he loves the ballot initiative process because to him it's a harmless safety valve because he always ignores the outcome of these referendums. He said earlier that his most proud achievement was his support of the SJC's decision to overturn the will of the people on same-sex marriage. We've said time and again that we don't want our income tax to be as high as it is, but Jamie consistently votes to raise taxes, not to lower them. So, that's sort of it's sort of no surprise to me that you would be so in favor of such a toothless process.
Ms. Friedrichs, I'll let you go. And
Yes,
then
I
Senator
just
Eldridge.
want to question Mr. Busiek about his ideas about government getting out of the way, and this marijuana thing is a perfect example of government getting out of the way, or at least minimizing the regulation and the taxation as opposed to incarceration. So we would be reducing the amount of government involvement in marijuana. So I thought you would be in favor of that.
Yeah, you might have confused me for a libertarian. I'm not. I think that the government has a role in conserving our culture. I'm sort of an economic libertarian and a cultural nationalist. I don't have a problem with a law against using a substance which, if we have a consensus on it, and maybe we don't, but using a substance which we have a consensus on being sort of culturally gauche, any more than I am against laws, for example, against public nudity. For me, it's a cultural thing. I wouldn't vote to liberalize any other drugs for the exact same reason. The health risks are actually secondary to me.
Can you tell us more about how you'd use government to preserve our culture?
Off the top of my head, yeah, here's a great example. We have a culture that says there's a bathroom for ladies and a bathroom for men. So why did we just see Beacon Hill prohibit property owners from segregating their bathrooms by gender? That's insane, right? We have this long-standing cultural institution and standard. I'd rather see that preserved than demolished.
I'm going to let Senator Eldridge chime in here.
Perfect time for me to chime in. I will say, Ted, I think the issue you've talked about the most tonight, it seems to be focused on social issues and specifically gay and lesbian couples and transgender people. So that seems a little strange to me. I think that when we talk about protecting rights in society, it's about protecting the rights of the minority and not the majority. And so you mentioned an early effort to ban same-sex marriage. Part of my responsibility as a legislator is not just to think about the will of the majority or what people happen to feel at that moment, but think about how this is going to affect every single constituent in my district. That's why I protected marriage equality and opposed the constitutional amendment to define marriages between a man and a woman. And you referred just now to the Transgender Public Accommodations Bill, a very common sense bill that basically would allow someone who is transgender to use a bathroom according to the gender identity that he or she has. It's something that has support from the public. It passed in a bipartisan manner, so you're really on the extreme, whether it comes to gay rights, transgender rights, or I think other rights for those who are in the minority, and I think that's a very disturbing position to have as someone who's running to represent all the people.
I'm sorry, what's weird about bringing up, whatever, gay or gender issues? That was the first thing that you brought up when you talked about what you were proudest of. I promise you, if you stopped shoving this stuff in our faces, we wouldn't be talking about it.
But it's important to shove things in people's faces. If we are silent in the face of injustice, then it's a crime, I believe, as a society that claims to be civilized.
We're going to move on to another issue area here. And this is, again, an audience question. Governor Baker recently issued a veto that reduced arts funding in the Commonwealth back to 1994 levels. What is your position on government support for the arts in Massachusetts and its effect on our economy and quality of life? And I'll start with Senator Eldridge.
One of the most inspiring events that I went to over the weekend was the grand opening of Discovery Woods at the Acton Discovery Museums. And that's going to be an opportunity for children to better enjoy the environment, to get outside, to better learn science. That was a project that I was a very strong supporter of, including securing funding from the Mass Cultural Facilities Fund, as well as an earmark in last year's budget to help build the tree house and pass next to the Acton Discovery Museums. I'm a very strong supporter of the arts. The question asked about Governor Baker's veto of mass cultural councils. This includes a cut to the Acton Boxborough Cultural Council. One of my favorite events I go to every year is the awarding to artists in the Acton Boxborough area who are singers and painters and designers. So I oppose Governor Baker's veto. I'll be voting to override it, and the legislature will be in session over the next 2 weekends to do that. I was very disappointed that Governor Baker didn't simply make a small cut, but he cut 50% of arts funding. This affects every single community, including the 14 communities that I represent, and strongly oppose his cutting of that funding for the arts.
Mr. Busiek.
Yeah, I mean, we just heard from the state legislature that we don't have enough money for the traditional tax holiday this year. But my opponent is upset that Governor Baker is looking for places to cut. Public funding for the arts, the only public funding for the arts that I believe in is public funding for public arts, which would be like public statuary. The idea that we're spending money on anything like that, though, and any sort of, I guess, sort of public frivolity when we're seeing people, when we're seeing manufacturers leaving the Bay State in droves, shows the complete lack of priorities that comes from Beacon Hill.
Ms. Friedrichs.
I'm a business consultant, and the future of business isn't in manufacturing, it's in service jobs. That's my first thing. And so, yes, we want responsible manufacturing, but the loss of some manufacturing might be a good thing. But the question was about
Arts funding.
arts funding. My goodness. I don't know the exact quote, but Winston Churchill said once when they were trying to find the money for war, he said, what exactly would we be fighting for if we reduced the arts spending? So,
Winston Churchill said that about public parks.
well, are we going to say that statuary is the only kind of art? What about crayons for kids? I feel like we can't decide, oh yeah, that's right, you want the government to preserve our culture and regulate our culture, right? Am I getting that right?
I don't mind laws that preserve culture. I mind laws that use my money to pay for somebody else's kids' crayons. Sure.
I can keep going. Okay, so in public school systems where they don't have toilet paper and the teachers who are making $40,000 a year are buying the crayons for them, I think we've got a problem. And we have a problem when, and again, my clients are making billions of dollars and they're not paying their fair share. I think we've got a problem. When we're depending on growth and new tax revenues from construction for housing we don't even need, I think we got a problem. So if we're going to argue about statuary versus crayons, I think what we're doing is creating a world of fear where we're pitting one need group against another need group, as opposed to saying, what do we really need, and then let's go get it.
Well, what we're doing is we're missing the point entirely. I mean, you said that it's all right or it's a good thing if we lose some manufacturing. It's not a good thing for the people who lost their jobs. It isn't a good thing for the people for the over 500 people who lost their jobs when Ethan Allen left the state, or the 450 people who lost their jobs when Flextronics left the state, or the over 100 people who lost their jobs when FootJoy left the state, or the over 80 people who lost their jobs when Archer Daniels Midland took their chocolate manufacturing out of the state. Because we're living in a service economy, are we not going to eat chocolates anymore? I mean, it's never a good thing when people are losing their jobs. And an economy based on services is a phantom economy.
I think
Senator Eldridge, I'm going to
Something
let.
about me.
Well, I'll let you respond after that.
I think what I would add is that in the discussion about job creation is a difficult one, but I think there's a recognition in Massachusetts that in order to create jobs, we have to recognize that we have an educated workforce, and therefore we need to invest in our young people and in people that maybe are losing a job and need to retrain themselves to get a job that pays the same. And I've seen that in the district that I represent, the Bristol-Myers Squibb, which is a manufacturing facility. It manufactures a drug to combat Alzheimer's. That is a facility that requires high skills that is trained for by Mount Wachusett Community College, which has a satellite campus at Devens. That is direct state investment that's creating jobs in Massachusetts. I think when we're talking about the arts, it's important to remember that the second biggest form of the economy in Massachusetts is tourism, and a lot of that is our arts, whether you're talking about the Acton Discovery Museums, whether you're talking about museums in Boston, whether you're talking about what's going on in Springfield with the Dr. Seuss Museum. Those are all government investments that it's not simply about something that sounds nice, but it's actually creating jobs, it's contributing to the creative economy, and part of the strength of Massachusetts' economy, it is so diverse. But what that means is we need to invest in education, We need to invest in things like solar power. We need to invest in transportation and the arts. And that's part of my challenge as a legislator is finding the investments in all those areas.
I'm amazed, Jamie, that you would have the audacity to laud your record in the district. 700 people in Hudson lost their jobs when Intel pulled out of the state. Now, almost simultaneously, they were opening up a $1 billion factory in Vietnam. Why do you think that was?
Well, when I said
I'm going to
about
let Terra chime in here.
Well, when I said about manufacturing companies that go away, there are certain manufacturing companies, I'm not saying all of them, some of the ones that you mentioned I would be in favor of keeping, but I don't think that we need to give them tax breaks to be able to do private enterprise. I do, however, want to fund, if we're going to fund any businesses, small, cooperative, sustainable, triple bottom line businesses that are paying a living wage, that actually invest in our communities, as opposed to these larger companies that are just going to desert us. Thank you.
One final comment, Senator
I think
Eldridge?
what I'd add is, and Ted, this might be the only issue we agree on, is criticism of free trade policies, and that makes it easier for corporations, including Intel, to send their jobs overseas where people are lower paid. So I think when you talk about Intel, their workforce wasn't properly trained by Intel. Their machinery was very outdated, and with all due respect to Intel, they didn't make the proper investments in that company to allow them to keep up their manufacturing there. That's part of why they went out of state.
They made the proper investments, brother. They made the investments in Vietnam. They're making a killing because it's amazing what you can achieve on a bowl of rice a day.
Especially when you don't pay any income, pay any wages that people can live on. Slave wages, slave conditions.
Exactly. Amen, sister. So,
That's what you want for our state?
No, what I want for our state is to level the playing field so that people here can make a living wage on a working class job. And the way to do that is exactly what I've proposed, is to create tax incentives to stay in the state.
This is obviously a very lively issue, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to call a halt to it because we are running out of time, and this will conclude the debate portion of this evening's program. I will now give each of the candidates a brief 60 seconds to make a closing statement, and we'll go in the reverse order in which they made their opening remarks. So we will start with you first, Ms. Friedrichs.
I have 1 minute. Thank you.
You have 1 minute.
As I had said, we're in a crisis, an environmental crisis, an income inequality crisis, and a small business crisis. We cannot continue to be on the path of unsustainable growth. We need to address the growth before we can address everything else. It's all going to fall out if we address the growth problem. We have enough resources. We just need to be able to use them properly. We have 2,500 units in Acton that are market rate affordable. Over a quarter of all of the units. We don't need any more moderate income housing. Yes, it would be nice to have granite counters and new houses and everything else, but in reality, what's happening is it's a drain on our economy. We're going into debt with the infrastructure to support all the growth. It's environmentally unsustainable, and the people that are actually working on these jobs aren't even making a living wage. So I think we need to address the growth, and we should stop putting money into infrastructure for private companies to be making money off that growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Eldridge, your closing.
Well, I want to thank Ching-Sung Chang, the Acton Selectman, to help organize tonight's debate, Peter Ashton for moderating, and of course Acton TV for televising it. And I want to also thank my opponents, Ted Busiek and Terra Friedrichs, for a very lively debate. I'm very proud of the achievements that I've secured and worked on in areas like education, environment and alternative energy, transportation, things like transparency and campaign finance reform. And anyone that knows me, whether you're talking about my constituent work, whether my work on policies, knows that I'm extremely passionate about my position, about my job, take it very seriously, and extremely grateful to represent the people of the Middlesex and Worcester District. So I am asking for your support to return as your state senator, to serve the 14 communities of Middlesex and Worcester, and take the next steps on criminal justice reform, on public transparency, on issues like doing our part to combat climate change. And I ask for your support, and it's been an honor to represent you. I hope I get to continue that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Busiek, your closing.
I also want to thank you, Peter, for being a fantastic and terrific and telegenic moderator.
Hi, you too.
I want to thank Ching-Sung Chang for helping to set this up, and Acton TV, who are wonderful. And I want to quickly say, a lot of people have been, well, there's been a spectrum of reaction to my candidacy. Some people are very excited. Some people are a little quizzical. Some people have been kind of alarmed. I think that I think that my being in this race is really a creation of Beacon Hill, right? Beacon Hill is Dr. Frankenstein, and people like me are the monster. The vast majority of my supporters, the people volunteering for me, giving me loads of their time on sheer goodwill, are under the age of 25, right? The Republicans running for state senate don't usually get that. They get a lot of old people. Nothing against old people. What's happening here is that the narrative is changing. The discussion is changing. And I'm really happy to be racing ahead of that curve. I'm Ted Busiek. I hope I've got your votes.
Thank you. I want to thank each of the candidates this evening for appearing. I think this has been a lively and interesting discussion, and most importantly, I hope the debate will assist voters in making a decision about who they will have represent them in the state senate in the coming years. And finally, for all of those of you who are watching, please remember that it is your democratic duty to exercise your right to vote, and this will be a very important election year. Thank you all very much.